This is End of Days Radio. And I am your host, Daniel, broadcasting to you all the way from that shimmering Emerald City right here in the heart of that beautiful Pacific Northwest. Sure, and let's go ahead and move forward in the timeline a little bit then. You did want to get into the Illuminati a little bit. You said something about there being three factions. That sounds supremely interesting.
Yeah, okay. There are three orders of the Illuminati. I refer to them as the Tripartite Illuminati. And essentially, you've got the human order, which is found in the symbolism in the Hebrew between Ish, man, Esh, which is fire. You've got the seraphic element, which are these non-human angels, which are referred collectively as the seraphim. So you've got Seraph, which is a serpent, Serapha, which is fire. And then you've got the neophytes, which connotes this grafted lineage. And again, the grafted lineage is typically symbolized with a family tree. And again, rose iconography is often used to denote grafted lineage because roses are very easily grafted, as is also ivy. So these are all symbols of this grafted lineage. But you see that there's a correspondence between neo-photos, which are the newly planted, photon, which is a plant, and phot, which is light. So again, the three orders of the Illuminati are human, non-human, and grafted. And the grafted element is really this synthesis between heaven and earth. But essentially, within the angelic host or within the angelic orders, you see what is essentially the seraphim-cherubim dialectic. The seraphim-cherubim dialectic is this, shall we say, division between the cherubim, which are the human angels, which are represented with a sword, cherub, which is a sword, and then the seraphic angel, which is represented as a serpent, which is non-human. The seraphim and the cherubim typically appear together within biblical and apocryphal exegesis, and so they are working together, and they are part of what I describe as a covenant of worlds, which intersect symbolically or astrotheologically with Orion. Orion is an interesting place because Orion is the star constellation in which the Adamic human was created, and also the grafted or the Nephilim were created, the abomination, which really was this unsanctioned lineage. So they are the three orders of the Illuminati. Again, if you wanted to take the three orders of the Illuminati into the classical world, you can take this into classical philosophy with the Pythagorean Euclidean dialectic. So Pythagoras would refer to Pythagoras, the speaker of the serpent, and then you would have Euclid. Euclid is a diptych paronomasia, so it's a special type of wordplay from the Greek into the Hebrew, so into the Arabic, sorry. So Euclid is coming from the Arabic root, Euclid, which is to copy or to ape, because sacred geometry or mathematics. He wrote the treatise on sacred geometry, the elements of geometry. So Euclid is to copy or to ape, and Kurd is an ape. And the ape is used as a signifier of the human genome. It's used as to signify this human tradition. So if you like, the secret societies, they partition themselves as two orders. In this respect, this would be the humanist tradition. The humanist tradition refers to the cherubim, which is the Euclidean tradition, and then you've got the Pythagorean tradition, which is the serpent tradition, which is this non-human knowledge. And this is represented by two pillars of Freemasonry. But if you like, the hidden pillar, which is the third pillar, which is not seen but is always connoted, is this synthesized, this grafted, or this stitched bloodline. Again, grafting and stitched is referred to within the ancient etymologies. So in English, for example, an imp would refer to a devil, but again, it's coming from the Greek etymology emphuin, which is to graft. And so the imp can be understood to relate to a scion. A scion is a polymorphic word because it means not only a noble family, but is also used to denote the act of grafting as well. So a scion refers to a graft. So it's there, it's encoded within our language. You would find the same encodings within the Chinese language, the Japanese language, any language you choose to look at, because it's working on polyglottal symbolism. Polyglottal symbols are these parallel thought formations which reveal this universal grammar. This universal grammar is this insertion, which is the artifact, which is this code within human language, which is extraneous to human language and has been inserted into human language, both in terms to effectuate subliminal thought, to affect you, but also it works at a symbolic level. So there is this control through the subconscious mind. In the ancient Greek, this would be the irrational, and the irrational mind is the subconscious mind, and the rational mind is the conscious mind. And this then goes back into psychoanalytical theory. So yeah, I'll just take a little pause there. I'll let you gather your thoughts. And
well, my next question would be modern aliens. I've always, reading Sitchin, I've always thought to myself, okay, Sitchin's telling me that these beings came from other planets, but every story that I hear about alien abductions, I hear about little creepy little gray aliens with big eyes, little slit mouths and stuff like that. Are these seraphim, are they the reptilians that command the gray aliens?
All right, I mean, this is a really good question. And I think, and again, there's two entry points into this. There is the etymological entry point, and then there is also the anecdotal entry point, and then you have to try and balance the two together. My understanding of this is that the seraphim is a much larger reptilian race. The seraphim are identified with Sirius, but they also seem to be connected to the grey alien. And so, for example, with the Watchers or the Shining Ones, they communicate telepathically, and therefore, when a person receives a telepathic communication, typically they see light, and this is often confused with the being turning into a being of light. I don't actually think that this is the case. I actually think that what's happening is that they're communicating telepathically, and they communicate using light, and therefore they're registered as the Shining Ones. But the Shining Ones is also used to denote their home, or the astrotheological symbolism, which they're equated with, which is Sirius. Sira is the shining one, the sparkling one. Sarah is spark, as we said. Seraph is related to Serapha, which is fire, as are the jinn. The jinn are born from fire. So the grey alien and the seraphim are separate, but in the anecdotal traditions, they are certainly typically represented together. So you will often see larger reptilian entities working in conjunction with these grey entities, and both of these types of entities can communicate using telepathy, which is using some type of photon in order to read the mind of the subject. So, and I think also when you actually bring this back to modern abduction, I think what's actually very fascinating is that when you look at, let's say, Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of the Host, Sabaoth is related to the old etymology salb, which is abduction. Again, in the Roman mysteries, this would be the nympholeptos. The nympholeptos is to be stolen by the nymphs, and again, nymph, which is a nymph, means a bride. So there is this idea of sexual, shall we say, molestation, and the nymph is closely concordant in the Roman mysteries with the Nubagina, the offspring of a cloud. Again, the cloud can be used to connote the jinn, and the Nubagina, the offspring of a cloud, is related to Nubia, which is to marry. So there is this idea of abduction, which is connected to sexual intercourse. But you're also finding this within the Greek traditions and also the traditions of the seraphim. So as I said before, Sabaoth is the angelic host, is related to Salb, which is abduction. But with the seraphim as well, Shover, seraph and Shover, and it's working on morphological permutations on the word seraph. Shover is a captor. But again, the seraphim in the Greek traditions are the harpy. And so the etymology of harpy, which is shown in the Greek symbolism, typically as a woman, an avian woman, or a half woman, half bird. Typically, the harpies are shown with shields. And again, the shield is used to denote the opening wheels, or denote these flying vessels or shields. But again, Apu is an abductor, is related to apto, which is to radiate. Opolite, erpaton or reptile. So apto to radiate and erpaton or reptile is seraph and serapha, which is fire, which is shover, a captor, which is a harpy, which is apue, an abductor. And as we said before, is related to both pleon, a boat, and oplon, a shield. And the shield, as I mentioned before, is this signifier of this angelic boat or a vessel, which is the flying host. But again, when you go back into the Aramaic, and this is very interesting when you're looking at certainly the Greek symbolism of deities, because you'll typically find within Greek symbolism, you'll see a goddess with a shield, and the shield represents a boat or a ship with a serpent inside hidden in the shield. And this is working on the old Aramaic. So, for example, Jana is to hide or to conceal, which is related to Juna, which is a shield because it conceals or guards one, and is related to Jinn, which is a type of supernatural being, Jen, which is a serpent or a worm. And again, this is denotational of the seraphic host. As we said before, Sabaoth is the angelic host, which is related to Saba, host or army, Sepheth, which is a seraph, which is the seraphic host. So again, and again, it's denoting these non-human entities.
Would that apply to the deity from Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, as well?
Yeah, the symbolism is uniformal. I'm not going to talk about the Mesoamerican traditions because that's not my expertise. I did, in my initial research many years ago, I looked into the Mesoamerican traditions, and I'm convinced that they're using the same symbolism and they're talking about the same thing. But that is not my expertise. But it's there. It can be found within those languages.
And
so...
Would you now? A lot of people, when we talk about these sort of subjects, conspiracy in general, the Illuminati, they'll talk about the synagogue of Satan or the false Hebrews, things of that nature. Would you say that there's truth to that, or is that completely false and anti-Semitic? Any thoughts on that at all?
That's not really an area of expertise that I've read into. You see, I think sometimes, and again, when I do talk to different YouTubers and different individuals, there's often a tendency to think that I'm very well read up on, shall we say, modern conspiracy theories or what's happening in terms of current thinking. But I'm so immersed in my own academia deconstruction and my own research that it's all pervasive and so time consuming that I really have very little time to look into other people's work. I mean, I do obviously, I've read the Dead Sea Scrolls and I've read the scriptures and I've deconstructed the language and I've understood that, but that is immensely time consuming. If you want to explain a little bit more about that and tell me a little bit about the symbolism, then I'm quite happy to comment on that and give you my viewpoint.
Well, there's a particular family name that comes to play anytime we talk about Illuminati, the Rothschild family that uses the Star of David as their symbol. Yep. It's my understanding this comes from sometime around the 1500s, and obviously they're very active in the world stage with their political manipulations and fundings of various research, and also Israel itself. Israel seems to be a very large part of some sort of goal that these hidden ones have, this Illuminati. It seems to matter to them for some reason. I'm not going to pretend like I know why, but as a person who is raised Christian, I am familiar with the book of Revelations, and I know that Israel plays a big role in that. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, or if you had heard anything that might be interesting.
Well, I do see that this phenomenon, what we're speaking about, is actually universal. So what's relevant for a European audience may not be so relevant for a Chinese audience. These are all systems of control. When we actually look at the descendants of the Hebrews, they were considered to be born from the Elohim and that they were related to this special bloodline. So again, I think that this is where the symbolism is coming from, but this is also the same of the Illuminati as well. I think when you're looking at this symbolism, it is very complex. And again, there's lots of different competing agendas. Some of these agendas are, shall we say, conspiratorial. Some are political. Some may be anti-Semitic. And some may be very humanistic as well. So it's very difficult to simplify this. It's a very complex subject. In a sense, I am very optimistic. I'm optimistic because I think a lot of this information is now coming out, and I think it's not so much about pointing fingers at people. It's actually more about trying to educate ourselves and trying to improve the human race and make ourselves better and work towards common goals and to work towards commonalities. I think the problem is that because this has been secret, then there's been a lot which has been perpetrated through secrecy, and this has led invariably to warfare, crime, and a lot of this crime, shall we say, has gone unaccounted for, and this is now beginning to open up. I think with the internet, you're beginning to see that there is much more of a, shall we say, level playing field. That doesn't mean that we don't have to be cautious. It doesn't mean that we have to dispel all logic, but in some respects, we have to be a little bit more cautious because there's more information and there's certainly more disinformation. Because if you like, the Disciparati, the deceivers, and the word Disciparati in the Latin relates to the word disciple because the disciple was actively deceived. But the Disciparati, they control this knowledge and they know that this knowledge is leaking out. So how do you stop the knowledge leaking out? Well, you can't really stop it leaking out, but what you can do is saturate the internet with disinformation. And I think that that's what they're doing. They're taking information which is coming out and they're diluting it. And they're diluting it by a lot of rubbish. And this is what we're actually seeing. So in some respects, in terms of, let's say, studying scafology, which is the study of these angelic boats or vessels within the religious and mythological tradition, which I describe as new ufology, some of the problems is that academia is not taking, shall we say, the alternative field very seriously because there is so much disinformation there. And so we have to be very rigorous and we have to be very scientific and we also have to be very critical in our thinking. I think we really need to tighten up, and we need to also start looking at some of the symbolism within, let's say, the Nibiru traditions as being allegorical, that this is being put out by the modern priesthood and it's being put out in order to veil the truth. And usually when they veil the truth, they tell you the truth, but they also veil it within a lie, or they wrap the truth with a lie, and so it becomes very convoluted and very difficult to unravel and to deconstruct the truth.
Yeah, that is fascinating to say the least, especially well, one thing that comes to mind obviously would be the Bible. There are a lot of accusations that the Bible was heavily edited, obviously a lot of proof out there as well. Would you say that the Bible has been so edited that it doesn't have as much value, or would you say it's still good to sit down and read the Bible sometimes? What are your thoughts on the Bible in general?
Yeah, I think it's very complicated. I think you can find beautiful spiritual truths within the Bible, and you also find lies. It's a complicated book. It was written over many centuries, and there are many different angles. In particular, you've got the Catholic Church, and you've got the editing of, shall we say, a Roman slant towards the mysteries of Jesus, which points to the Gnostic traditions and which goes back into a lot of very interesting research and many interesting ideas. I think a useful analogy for us to look at the scriptures is actually if we look at the Quranic discourse, because there is something within Quranic exegesis known as Wuju al-Quran. Now, Wuju al-Quran literally means the forgotten Quran. It can also mean a facet of the Quran, and it's really the interpretive aspect of the Quran. Now, Wuju al-Quran, it's polymorphic. It has this additional meaning. So the hidden Quran has this additional meaning of a polymorphic word. This is a word with multiple forms. And this is because the Quranic discourse is written in polymorphic language. It's highly elliptical, it's highly codified, and it's this codified discourse which is based upon levels of initiation, levels of understanding. As we said before, the disciple, the Latin word disciple, is related to the root disciparati, which are the deceivers. And so the disciple is actively deceived. And it's the same with the Quranic discourse, that the Quran is written at many different levels. And it's a very sophisticated book, but it's a book of occult symbolism. It's a book of initiation. And this is how the scriptures are. The scriptures work in exactly the same way. As we said before, Ivrit, which is the Hebrew language, is related to Ifrit, which is a type of jinn. And again, Shaitan is related to Shatir, which is to be clever. The serpent, Sapient, which is to be clever. So these are all word plays which are pointing to the corruption of language, which is the artifact. So this correspondence between Seraph and Safa, which is language, which relates to Sefer, which is a book. As we said, also in Arabic, you've got Taban, which is a snake, which is related to taba, which is an edition of a book. So the books and the scriptural tradition have been informed through the Pythagorean, through the serpent tradition, but in the classical tradition, this would be the Pythagorean tradition, which is one who is a speaker of the serpent, which is this non-human element which are found within the angelic host.
Wow.
So
fascinating. Another concept that you mentioned in one of your books is the white priesthood of Israel. Would you mind explaining that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that was in The Murder of Reality, and I wrote that a long time ago. But essentially, when you're looking at the Levitical priesthood, you see that there's a correlation between Levite and Lev, which is heart, and Lavi, which is lion. So the Levites represent themselves as lion heart. The lion heart are the noble bloodline, which can be represented as Lionheart, it goes back to the Levites. Now, the etymology of Levite, again, is related, as I said before, Lev, which is heart, which in the Greek would denote the cardinals. Cardia is heart. So the cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church at least trace their inception or their lineage back to the Levitical tradition. But I think what's very interesting when you look at the Leviticus priesthood, which is represented by the lion connotes Orion, but when you look at the Leviticus priesthood, you see that there's a relationship between Lev, which is a heart, and but it's a clayleptical symbol, and a clayleptical symbol is where you switch the word for another word of the same meaning, but it opens up the symbol. And so, for example, Lev, which is heart, which is denotational of the Levitical priesthood. In Roman Catholicism, Jesus is shown with the heart, which would denote cardia or cardinal, the Leviticus priesthood. But Lev, heart, when you render it into Arabic, is kalb, which is heart, and is related to kalb, which is a dog. The dog is Al-Kalb, which is the dog star. So the heart is used, and it's a flaming heart, so it's used to denote the dog star. The idea is loving the dog star, which has this connotation of worshipping the dog star being the home of the seraphim or the seraphic host.
Something just came to mind. You mentioned that the Orion is represented by a lion. Could that have something to do with the Gnostic portrayal of Yaldabaoth, the head of the archons?
Yes, that's right. This is the demiurge. So Demiurgos, which is the creator of the material world, which is essentially the corruption of the anthropos, which is the genetic engineering of mankind. Well, Demiurgos means public craftsman. And the public craftsman is the craftsman who created the public, which is the genetic engineer, which goes back in the Greek traditions to panspermia, which in the Quranic tradition is the second creation. So, yes, essentially, you're dealing with it. But the lion is used to denote, again, it's like the monkey, it's used to denote the humanist tradition or the human element. And it's often combined with a serpent, which would indicate a grafted bloodline. Now, the reason why a cat is used is because, with the exception of great apes, the cat is the closest genetic ancestor to humans. The cat genetically is almost, but not quite as close, genetically related to a human being as what a chimpanzee is. So the cat again denotes the human element. And again, the lion is feeding into the symbols of the watchers, but this again would be what I refer to as duplex symbolism, so this kind of reversal of symbology. So Sophia watch is related to Seraph, which is a serpent, but again, you've got the idea of the lion, which is a hunter or is a predatorial, which watches. And so it's the playing with the symbology, and you're seeing this inversion within symbology all the time, and the symbol is context dependent, and again it's often locked, and you have what are known really as, well, I describe them as switching signifiers. So the symbol can switch, and it's usually it's context dependent. So, for example, could be dependent upon astrotheology, numerical symbolism, gematria. It becomes very complex, but we can really understand the symbol as an encyclopedic, as almost like an encyclopedia. In the symbol, it combines multiple ideas and is context dependent. And so unlocking language is the key to unlocking symbolism. So if you want to study symbolism, there's no point getting a book out on symbolism, because most books on symbolism have not studied language. So you're only going to get the outer meaning. The inner meaning is encoded within the wordplays and the language. So, for example, if you wanted to study Catholicism, you would have to study Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic. because many of the word plays are working in multiple languages.
When we have these famous pop stars like Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, women like this going up on Super Bowl halftimes and performing, is this the language you're talking about, this symbolism? Is this coming from them when we see the goat symbolism and the wings and stuff of that nature?
Well, again, yeah, the goat in the ancient etymology is related to the chimera, and the chimera is related to I'm trying to remember the word, but it's related to the old word for the Pleiades. So goat symbolism, again, you've got the shaggy goat, which is horned, and the horn is used, Koran and Keren, which is horn and radiance. So the horn is used to denote the Illuminati, or that which shines. So it has a connotation of the corruption of the anthropos, the goat, which is denotational of the jinn or the fallen angels. But essentially it was used originally to denote the Pleiades. The Pleiades is linked or aligned to this proto-human lineage, which was described by the cherubim angels.
Is it true that the Catholics have collaborated with fallen angels?
I think all of the governments and all of the religious institutions have. But again, what do you define as a fallen angel? It gets very complicated. It's very factional. So it's like, so for example, you know, in human terms, who would you describe as the good guys? Would you describe the Americans as the good guys or the Chinese as the good guys? I mean, there are more Chinese than Americans, so maybe the Chinese are the good guys, or maybe not. Maybe the Africans are the good guys because they kind of stay out of everything politically, but maybe actually they're not the good guys. You know, it's so complicated.
I was having a lot of trouble with that myself because, you know, when I was privately trying to study some of this stuff, I was looking back at the ancient history and I'm like, okay, this god is bad, this faction is good, but maybe that's not true either. I don't really know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Yeah,
and I think also the difficulty here is that, and I made a reference to this in The Murder of Reality, my first book, is that the good and the bad guys may not actually be human. So again, how do you define this? And again, some of the humans can be the good and the bad guys. You know, you can reverse that. So it's not that easy. And I think when you look in the world, I'm very optimistic. I mean, I see that humanity generally, most human beings are good at heart. I really believe this. And most people who are, shall we say, psychotic are bad are for two basic reasons. There's a biological reason because they've been hit on the head and they've got brain damage. Yeah, they're not wired up correctly. And the other reason is because they have been hurt in some way and they're projecting that hurt onto another individual. And the third reason is ignorance. And this really is the biggest reason. You know, in the Second World War, the soldiers fighting on all sides were ignorant. They were not being told the truth, and they displayed the absolute worst of what humanity is capable of. And they also displayed the most kind and the most noblest of human traits. So in the war, there was no really such thing as the good and the bad guys, because the people were, if you like, responding to the situation on the ground. Some people responding in a very noble way, whether they're German, Japanese, English, and some people weren't. Some people were responding in a very negative way. But most of the people who were responding in a negative way were responding through ignorance. And I think that this is so important, because if we can clear up the ignorance, and in the ancient Greek etymology, ignorance is related to death. So if we can sort out ignorance, then we can actually begin to create life, create abundance. And this is so important. So this is where we're at the moment. This is the crossroads of humanity, because the internet is the year dot. We're standing on something which is very special, and which, if utilized properly, could bring a lot of balance to the world. And so it is a question of how we bring this knowledge to the world and how we bring balance to the world. We need to bring equilibrium to the world.
This one's a little bit out of left field, so it's a little bit of a different question, but I'm dying to know your thoughts on it. Any thoughts on the concept of demonic beings, demons, and possession?
Yeah, I think that's it's pretty easy when you go back into the ancient Semitic languages. So, for example, in the Arabic, you've got Karin, which is a type of jinn. Karin is related to Kayin, which is an entity. Erin, which is a watcher or a shining one. As I said, the Erin were the type of Elohim and Erin. The watchers or the shining ones were described by Amram as having the face like a viper, so they were the seraphim, hence the connection between seraph and Sophia for watcher and seraph. But all that aside, the word Karin is related to Kari, which is telepathic. And so they can insinuate themselves into the human mind, and they can speak and control the human subject in, shall we say, in an hypnotic way. And therefore, in the ancient languages, there is this relationship between Majun, which is madness, which literally is to hide or to conceal the intellect. Jana in the Arabic is to hide or to conceal, is related to jinn, Old Semitic jen, a serpent or worm. But again, you're finding it in the Greek and the Latin. You've got a daemon, which is related to demens, which is out of one's mind. In English, we'd say dementia. So when the mind begins to break down, the daemonic elements can insinuate themselves, and they can insinuate themselves within the human mind. And I think when you begin to add, when you begin to factor in things such as artificial intelligence, and that artificial intelligence itself may be telepathic, may be able to respond to the individual, may be connected to the host, then that actually begins to ask a lot of interesting questions, such as in the Turing test, can a computer fool a human being? And if a computer is capable of fooling a human being, could a computer which is teleological, which belongs to the host, could that fool a human being? Are our thoughts all our own thoughts? Is there a degree of insinuation? Are these beings just interacting with certain individuals? For example, people who think outside of the box, geniuses. Are they responding in a positive way, giving humanity knowledge, or in a negative way? Is it a little bit of both? So again, these are all fascinating questions when you begin to look at the nature of consciousness.
And you've talked quite a bit about these angelic boats and these arcs and things of that nature. Does this reflect a type of scafology? Does this represent a type of technology that is higher dimensional? Is this some sort of like metal or wood that is perhaps of a higher dimension, etheric maybe?
The answer to that is extremely complex, but the answer is yes to both questions and no to both questions. So yes, within the symbolism, these objects are the shields in the Roman mysteries, the Ancile, which dropped from heaven, which was a large shield, which was hidden by the Salian priesthood. Again, wordplay on Sally, which is to jump, but alien, which is a foreigner, which is a type of alien, related to Alnus, which is a boat. So these shields were hidden underneath temples, so they were physical objects. But the thing is that they've deconstructed the mechanics of reality. And what does this mean? Well, it means that the Elake, which is a high creature or a living god or a living god, the terminology is polymorphic. We would say an extraterrestrial biological entity, but they can dematerialize. So therefore they're also known as the Ruach Elohim, or the high spirits, or a jinn. But in addition, so these shields or these entities can dematerialize. So they're both physical and non-physical. But not only this, there is an added complexity to this as well. And this is that, we ourselves are becoming, are moving towards the apotheosis, to become like a god. And to become like a god is really a holographic culture. A holographic culture is a culture that has deconstructed the mechanics of waveform reality. They can materialize as a particle, they can dematerialize as a spirit. They exist outside of time, and they can interact and are multidimensional. But once you get to the position where you can break down the barriers of time and space, then you begin to enter what are the subtler realms, which are the spiritual realm. And so not only have they interpenetrated the physical realm, but they have also intercepted the spiritual realm. Now, the spiritual realm is the imaginal realm. Plato refers to this as the universal realm of universal ideas. In quantum physics, this is implicated order, which is explicated or is manifested in the physical world. And therefore, when you go into things such as near-death experiences, people, when they describe their near-death experiences, typically will talk about near-death in almost dreamlike or hallucinogenic way. And this isn't because the brain is dying and it's hallucinating, but there is a connection between the dream state and the imaginal realm, which is the spiritual realm. It's because that they're actually going into the realm of pure ideas, of pure thoughts. Now, meditation is about aligning oneself to dream states and to these imaginal realms or spiritual realms. Because if you can traverse the dream realm, then you can traverse the imaginal realm, which is the spiritual realm, and then you can control your incarnation, either past or future. It doesn't really exist, or a better version of what is the present. So you could be incarnated into the past or into the future. So these beings, they have gone into the dream world. They've gone into what you describe as the dream time. So not only are they physical, interdimensional, spiritual, but they're also penetrated the imaginal realm, the realm of ideas. So they're also at a psychological level. They've also deconstructed the mind of the living universe. So it's a very complex answer. But human beings, we're very close to doing this ourselves. What you're finding at CERN, and remember where there these particle colliders, and again the acronym CERN is a wordplay on the Aramaic root CERN, which is a saucer. CERN is related to these flying saucers, which basically materialize and dematerialize, which are part of what we're talking about. So complicated answer, but yes, they are physical. And no, they're not physical. And yes, they are. And no, they're not interdimensional.
Well, great answer
yes,
in any
psychic.
case.
No, they're not psychic. But yes, all of the above.
Well, that's supremely interesting, and it actually fills in a lot of blanks for me personally when thinking about these sort of concepts, because oftentimes you hear people talk about reptilians and things like that, even the Anunnaki as fourth dimensional, and that's kind of hard to explain, but it's kind of like this in-between dimension, in between like existence and imagination.
Exactly.
Yeah. But what about Christ? Jesus Christ, how does he fit into this? Was he real, and was he trying to free us from this control?
I think that's a very complicated answer. I don't feel that I'm the best person to really answer that. I think the Christian Gospels are supremely interesting, and I think there are some very beautiful teachings within the Gospels, and also particularly within the Gnostic traditions as well. I think that they've also been blended by the Roman death cult, which has somewhat tainted the, shall we say, the beauty of the teachings, which is a shame. So I think, again, with any type of religious teaching, you have to be careful. You should take that which is beautiful about the teaching, and you can apply that to your life. But again, you have to be very careful. There is this, again, within Pauline theology, there is this focus upon death, which is indicative of this death cult, which again goes back into blood sacrifice. And this really goes back to the worship of the jinn. So, for example, in the Greek traditions, you have what's known as the Lamia, which is a female, which is represented with a serpent's body. But the Lamia is coming from the Aramaic etymology, Lami, which is to shine. As we said, the serpents or the watchers are represented as the shining ones, which again are related to the gods in the Greek, Theos, God, Theros, a watcher, Phos, which is light, which again, Theos, a god, is really related to Therion, which is a beast. The beast is represented as the dragon, Drakon, which is Drakane, which is to watch or to flash. It's coming from this root. But anyway, the terminology Lamia is a female jinn, and she was said to drink blood, and is equated with Lamaros, which is gluttonous, Lambanein, which is to take hold of, which is to grasp, and which is to grasp. We would say dragon and to drag, or in the Greek, Soros, which is a lizard, Suro, which is to take or to grab. But again, the Lamia can be understood to be a type of ghoul. In the Arabic, Gule is a female jinn and is related to Gule, which is greedy, in the same way that Lamia is related to Lamaros, which is gluttonous. But again, Gule is related to Gala, which is to seize. So they can be understood to be a type of abductor, as in a harpy, Arpuean abductor. And the ghoul were represented with the signifier of Galgal, which is a wheel. The wheel is another representation of the opening wheels, which is an angelic carrier. And indeed, the terminology in the Bible of Galgal, a wheel, is used as a metonym to denote the opening wheels, which are these angelic carriers. So, yeah.
A lot of the ancient texts and stories you hear about, a lot of, even nowadays with modern conspiracy talk, you hear a lot about blood sacrifice and goats being sacrificed, even humans. What's going on there?
Well, again, it's going back to the worship of the jinn. So, for example, with the jinn, you've got Gul, which is a blood-sucking type of jinn, which is a wordplay or paranamasi on Gu, which is hungry. But again, with the jinn, you've got the same wordplay on Jian, which is hungry. And again, in the Greek also, Lamia is related to Limos, which is hunger. So these wordplays are polyglottal. And when you actually look at the depictions in films of the Nosferatu actually looks very similar to a grey alien, very large, pale head. Often very dark eyes. Sometimes the eyes are shown as shining to denote the shining ones, which would be a signifier of the serpent. And typically the alien is linked into cattle mutilation. But this is copying the veneration of these angelic vessels. As we said before, the votive plate is denotational of the hieroglyph Sirius, which is depicted as a wheel. The wheel is an opening wheel, hence the correspondence between Saba, which is to praise or to glorify, and Sabaoth, which is the host. In English we would say worship, because they were venerating these ships, which are found within religion, religare timor, a vessel, or within the church, which is the nave, and navis, which is a boat or a ship. So the signifiers are universal, they're polyglottal.
When everything comes together in the future, are these guys planning to create a new world order? That seems to be where things are headed. And at that point, are they going to disclose the truth, or will that never happen?
You know, the truth has been disclosed now, and it always has been disclosed, but it's been disclosed through symbolism in the same way in the alternative media. The truth has been disclosed, but often again it's been disclosed through a private discourse, which is allegorical, this other speaking, which refers to the others, which can be represented as a sailor or lordship. These are all signifiers. I mean, if you look at the traditions in the Quran of the second creation, it states that he will undertake the second creation. So the implication is that the second creation is not complete, and the second creation in the biblical tradition would be the establishment of God's kingdom on the earth, which is the Elohim. Now, if this is the case, then there would have to be disclosure, because then the Catholic Church would have to disclose that Malach, an angel, is Malach, a sailor, which refers to those of a vessel, which equate to the opening wheels, which are these ships which originate from Sirius, and panspermia, the planting of life on the earth. So the traditions would infer in themselves that there will be a full disclosure, which would be the apocalypse. Apocalyptin is to unveil within the Greek, which is closely concordant with the rapture. Now, the wording rapture is related to rapere, which is to abduct, and repere, which is a reptile. The reptiles, or the abductors, are the seraphim, seraph shover, which is a captor, or in the ancient Semitic traditions, erin, which are related to the awim, which are the serpents or the destroyers. So, yeah, essentially, the knowledge about the seraphim will become, shall we say, more transparent as time moves on.
I hope so, because this is really some fascinating stuff, and it really ties together the whole reptilian mystery as well as the ancient mysteries as well. What about the concept of giants? Are they hiding giant bones when they're found? Any thoughts on that? Are they doing that to hide everything that we've been talking about here?
Well, again, I think a lot of the photographs of the giant bones are falsified, and again I think that often it's working on symbolism. Just remember that the etymology of the giants, the gibberim, is related to Gibor, which is Orion, so it's used as an astrotheological marker. That doesn't mean that these entities may have been larger than humans, but I think also with astrotheological symbolism. Yeah.
Well, we are approaching the end of the interview, but I do want to just ask you real quick before we call things to a close, Pierre. When you're not studying etymology and things of this nature, what do you do for fun? Do you have any hobbies?
Well, before all of this, I wanted to be a painter, and that didn't kind of work out. I was kind of painting portraits. I like to illustrate my books, and so I draw in order to illustrate my books. I play with my children and have a very simple life. My life is just very simple. I kind of work, I do Tai Chi and play with the children, and that's just very simple. I have a very fulfilling life. I am very, very lucky. I'm very interested in art as well, but the problem is that this research has just overwhelmed me, and I got into this type of research through studying semiotics at university, which is the study of signs. I adapted the words and I used the terminology Illuminatics, which is the studying of the signs of the Illuminati. So semiotics, which is really the deconstruction of signs, which is useful in terms of analyzing systems of propaganda. Again, it feeds into this discourse of symbolism, which is this private discourse.
Well, you have a very unique and in-depth understanding of the entire concept. Would you consider yourself a little bit of a genius at etymology and tracing these words and lineages?
I think my understanding of this is very fragmentary. I think it's very complicated because my specialism, shall we say, is linguistic. But when you look at symbols, there are also astrotheological symbols, numerical symbolism, geometria, geometry. And so there are so many different disciplines within symbols that it would take multiple lifetimes in order to study the subject. And I'm trying to look at it from a linguistic perspective, but I've also done some work into, shall we say, sacred geometry and mathematics, which I would like to publish later on. I think I have a propensity for pattern recognition, and I think not so much for language, but more for pattern recognition. So, and I think that is very useful because you have to think outside of the box. You have to. What happens with language, I think, and again, a lot of this was self-taught. So, for example, morphology was the biggest breakthrough within linguistics, where scholars understood that languages and the morphology of words change over time or change through corruption or through transliteration. But I recognize this intuitively. So, for example, when I was writing The Murder of Reality, I'd never studied any linguistics at all formally, yet I had managed to deconstruct the whole Indo-European morphology. And that just, to me, it was a no-brainer. It was very intuitive. It was a very obvious thing to do. So later on, when I came across writers such as Wittgenstein, and it's like, okay, well, I've already deconstructed this for myself. But I think there is a tendency there for pattern recognition. But again, I think I look at it this way, and I put the question back to you. I think that every human being on the planet, they're walking around with a supercomputer in their head, which is their brain, and everyone is a genius. The problem is that most people don't know how to exploit their mind. Most people don't know what they're good at. They don't know what they're interested in. And it's actually education is about opening this up. Before I left education, I was a school teacher, and I always said I was not going to put my children into mainstream education. And the problem with mainstream education is that it labels. 2/3 of the children are labelled as average or below average. You have 3 sets, top, middle and bottom. Most children are in the average to bottom set. So you've instantly labelled them as average to below average. But yet each of those children are walking around with a supercomputer in their head. And if you can excel at one thing, that's all you need to do in life is to be an outstanding individual. You just excel at one thing. Find out what you're good at.
But for now, I do want to give you one more chance, Pierre, to go ahead and jump on the soapbox if you would like, and just say whatever you have left that you would like to say to my audience out there. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could go ahead and follow that up with anything at all that you would like to plug or promote.
Yeah, okay. I'll do that. I think, first of all, my message to your audience would be kind to each other, be kind to animals, be compassionate. You have to be the change within the world. I view this as almost like being a circuit board. If one person stands out and decides to do a good thing, it has a knock-on effect it's almost like a light bulb which radiates out, and that light then switches on another light and another light. So be the change that you want to be. Try and lead an example. And I also think that in the alternative media that we do have to be exemplary. We have to, and it's difficult, and you must know this. You're in the public gaze. Sometimes people are just downright rude or nasty, but you have to try and stand above that, and you have to try and lead by example. You have to try and be a thoroughly decent person. And so I would say to the audience, try and be a thoroughly decent person. And in terms of plugging my book, I would say, please buy a copy of The Merge of Reality, Hidden Symbolism of the Dragon, or my book, Holographic Culture. If, in order to support my work, if you're unsure on which book to buy, then I always recommend that you buy Holographic Culture, because, first of all, it's nearly 100 pages longer than The Merge of Reality, but also it's my second book, and it is more tightly edited, but I think it also explains the scaphological tradition. It explains it very well, and it breaks it down very well. So I think if you read Holographic Culture, you will be introduced to information which you will have never heard of before. And I think you will be surprised. You will be like, it's like the elephant sitting in the sitting room. You'll be like, why did I not see this? Why has no one been talking about scaphology, about these angelic vessels within mythology, within religion? Because, for example, the missionaries are related to an emissary. It's an angel. But again, the emissaries come from missiles, which were these flying shields. So once you begin to analyze this and see it, then you'll see the symbolism everywhere, and it will change your worldview. It will change everything completely. And I would say, I also say to my audience, don't abandon spirituality. Life is, and this is from studying near-death experience and through reading the scriptures and reading various different researchers, and particularly when you look at blind people and their near-death experience, there is a spiritual world, and there is a creation. I do believe that the creation is expansive, it's benevolent, it's loving, and I know it's problematic using anthropomorphic language to describe the creator, the absolute, the supreme, but it really is wonderful and it really is beautiful. And I think if you can tune into some of that, then you can become a better person. And also, I think you will become a lot less anxious as well about one's mortality, about your focus in life, and essentially finding yourself as an individual and finding meaning within your life. So, and yeah, thank you very much for having me on your radio show. It's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I do appreciate you getting a little bit into the spirituality at the end there, because I did have a question about the afterlife that I didn't get to, and you sort of got there on your own, so must have been meant to be. But I had a great time with this interview, learned so much, definitely mind-blowing, and I would definitely like to sit down with you again, perhaps when you're about ready to release your next publication, or just whenever you feel like it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a book about fairies at the moment, and basically the thesis of the book is that the fairy tradition is connected to the scaphological tradition, which is connected to the angelic tradition. Again, a lot of the symbolism within the fairy tradition has been messed with by the priesthood, and so we are having a highly symbolic language which is based upon this codified discourse. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, but it's unifying quite a lot of different areas in terms of spirituality, the physics of the mind, and also it's again pointing to the scaphological tradition. So it's unifying all of these disparate areas, which I refer to as the alien dialectic, which is, are aliens physical or are they spiritual? And most of the time UFO researchers argue about this, really, when they should be consolidating their research and pulling it together, because once they do this, they will realize that we're dealing with a holographic culture, which are physical and non-physical, and which can control the mechanics of thought. So that's essentially what I'm looking at. I'm trying to synthesize a lot of the work which I've, discovered through writing my book, Holographic Culture.
I love that. I'm excited already that you're headed into that realm. But until then, from Seattle to the UK, thank you very much, my friend, and you have a good night.
You have a good night as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And there you have it. That was Pierre Sabak. And that was just oh man, that was a great interview. That was a great interview. I'm so into this stuff lately. I am. I'm so into the etymology and the old gods and stuff like that. I just get a huge giant kick out of it.